Let me be straight with you right now, because the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation has reached a point where the gap between what is actually happening and what is being reported has become genuinely uncomfortable to watch. Not uncomfortable the way controversial sports opinions sometimes are. Uncomfortable in the way that makes you question whether the people doing the reporting have even read their own quotes back to themselves. I've been following this competition closely, obsessively, if I'm being honest. And what I keep running into is this wall of confident declarations built almost entirely on nothing. So I'm going to walk through this carefully because the details matter more here than in almost any other story I've touched this offseason. Here is where we actually are. The Cleveland Browns brought Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders together for a 3-day voluntary veteran minicamp in April. 3 days, no pads, no live pass rush, no defensive backs pressing receivers in full coverage, no competitive stakes attached to a single rep. And I need you to really hold that framing in your mind, because the nature of this event is the entire story. When a franchise installs a new head coach, the league allows a short orientation window, a period where the staff introduces terminology, lays philosophical groundwork, and begins building a shared language between coaches and players. That is the entire purpose of the thing. Todd Monken, the new head coach, stood in front of microphones after those sessions and described exactly that. He called it a 40,000-foot view. He was transparent about it. He was telling you directly not to read too much into any of it. What happened next is what I can't get past. Within hours of those sessions ending, the takes were already fully formed and traveling. Deshaun Watson had the inside track. Watson looked like a veteran seizing control of the room. Shedeur Sanders was falling behind. One outlet floated the idea, and this is the one that genuinely got under my skin, that Shedeur might not even hold the backup spot, third string on a depth chart, after 3 days of walking through an install in shorts. That version spread. It got picked up, repeated, echoed from show to show, amplified, until the sheer volume of it started functioning as its own kind of evidence. And the whole time I kept circling back to the same question. Where is this coming from? What is the actual factual foundation underneath any of it? Because here's what Monken actually said when he talked to reporters. Not the headline version, the real version. He explained that the practice script gave Shedeur Sanders more overall repetitions across those 3 days. He noted that certain practice windows were deliberately run-heavy. Run game periods naturally limit meaningful quarterback snaps regardless of who is taking them, and that this created a visual impression of imbalance that didn't reflect the real distribution of quarterback work. And then he said something I cannot explain why it didn't end the entire conversation. Shedeur Sanders went first in 11-on-11 team drills. First, on day 1. He also said the rotation would shift from day to day and that no one should draw depth chart conclusions from a single day's sequence. None of that made it into the version that circulated. Not the rep distribution, not the run period context, not the fact that Shedeur took the first team reps. What made it into the story was an image. Watson commanding the room, the veteran reclaiming his throne, the rookie scrambling to keep up. That image moved because it fit what people had already decided before they sat down to listen to the press conference. And the distance between what Monken actually said and what the coverage reported is not a difference of interpretation. It is a conscious decision about which facts to carry and which to leave on the floor. I want to tell you about something that happened in Miami during Shedeur's offseason because it reveals something about who this person actually is that no depth chart speculation could. He was down in Florida doing private training work, the invisible kind, before sunrise. No cameras invited, no content being produced, just a quarterback getting reps because the work needs to happen regardless of whether anyone is watching or filming or posting. A content creator found him while he was there, a streamer looking to capture Shedeur throwing routes for something shareable and engaging, and Shedeur's response was immediate and unambiguous. He essentially said, "You see a football in my hands right now, you need to understand what that means. Minicamp is coming. Training camp is coming. I have a competition in front of me. I am not here for content. I am here to work." Think about what that decision actually costs him in this specific moment. Think about the landscape he is operating inside. Deshaun Watson is owed $46 million by the Cleveland Browns regardless of who starts in September. That money doesn't move based on depth chart decisions. It's committed, and that commitment doesn't just sit neutrally in the background, it creates organizational gravity. It generates institutional pressure toward justifying what has already been spent, toward finding a way to make the investment look wise even when the on-field evidence starts suggesting otherwise. Shedeur can feel that current pulling. Anyone paying attention inside that building can feel it. And his response to that environment, in an offseason where he desperately needs visibility, needs narrative momentum, needs every positive story he can generate, is to turn down a content opportunity and go back to his footwork and his timing and his film. That is what character looks like when no one is grading it. And that kind of consistency, maintained quietly under exactly that kind of institutional pressure, is precisely what separates quarterbacks who perform when everything is real from the ones who look the part only when nothing is at stake. Josh Cribbs entered this conversation, and his perspective got significantly less serious treatment than it deserves. Understand who Josh Cribbs is in the context of Cleveland football specifically. Not a media personality with a platform and something to sell, but one of the most genuinely beloved figures in the entire modern history of that franchise. A man who gave Cleveland everything physically and emotionally across the complete arc of his career. He earned credibility through sacrifice, and fans in that city don't forget it. When a man with that standing says uncomfortable things, you engage with them. What Cribbs said was direct. He wants Shedeur Sanders to receive a real evaluation, a genuine one. He wants to see what this quarterback is capable of when given a full offseason. A coaching staff truly invested in his development and organizational clarity about who the future of the franchise belongs to, conditions that his entire first professional year never once provided. And when you actually look at what that first year was, the word difficult understates it. Shedeur's rookie season unfolded inside a franchise in structural chaos. The ownership situation was in transition. The offensive line couldn't reliably protect him. The receiving core was incomplete. The surrounding infrastructure a young quarterback needs to develop was compromised across multiple fronts. And yet, across 7 starts under those conditions, he competed at a level that earned him Pro Bowl recognition. Not a consolation honor, not a sympathy vote. A group of players and coaches in the NFL looking at a rookie in a genuinely brutal environment and making a deliberate judgment that his performance merited it. And somehow, consistently, the coverage positions him as the problem in Cleveland. The complication, the one with questions surrounding his professionalism. While Deshaun Watson, a man who hasn't played meaningful football in nearly 2 full years and carries one of the most complicated recent histories of any player at the position, gets framed as the misunderstood veteran deserving patient redemption. Look at that contrast directly. Ask whose interests that particular framing serves. The Baker Mayfield reference Cribbs made hit me differently than anything else in this whole conversation, and it was absolutely meant to. He didn't bring that name up casually. He brought it loaded with everything it represents to Cleveland specifically. Mayfield was pushed out. The narrative shifted against him. The organizational patience ran dry before the conditions ever genuinely allowed a fair answer. And then he landed somewhere that believed in him, and he won a Super Bowl. Cribbs was asking Cleveland a question that is so precise it is almost brutal. Are you seriously about to do this exact thing again? Are you going to let the sunk cost psychology of $46 million already committed, the institutional need to justify the most expensive financial decision in franchise history, the noise and the framing and the endless repetition of a verdict formed before the evidence was gathered? Are you going to let all of that cost you something genuinely valuable before it ever had the conditions to show you what it actually is? That is not rhetoric. That is the defining question of what Cleveland builds from this point forward. The financial logic for centering Watson gets made constantly, and I understand why it sounds reasonable on the surface. The money doesn't disappear based on who starts. The contract is committed regardless. So the framing runs. If you're paying him either way, why not give him every opportunity to compete? I get the arithmetic, but here is what that argument refuses to account for. Every snap Watson takes is a snap Shedeur is not taking. Development at the quarterback position is not a bank account. You cannot defer the reps, hold them in reserve, and draw them down later when you decide you need them. A quarterback develops through specific repetitions accumulated under specific pressure with specific coaching attention applied at a specific moment in the arc of his growth. That window does not stay open indefinitely. The real cost of building this competition around Watson's financial commitment is not measured in dollars. It is measured in the developmental trajectory of the quarterback who is supposed to represent the franchise's actual future. That cost doesn't appear on any spreadsheet, which may explain why it keeps getting overlooked by people who feel most confident when analysis comes with numbers attached. The third-string speculation deserves a moment of direct examination because it is, without qualification, the most reckless analytical overclaim in this entire coverage cycle. That conclusion is constructed almost entirely from the visual impression of 3 days of voluntary practice without pads, without live competition, without any of the conditions that produce meaningful evaluation. 3 days. The head coach explicitly said he had not named a starter. He explicitly said he would not draw competitive conclusions from an April voluntary session. He explained the rep distribution, explained the run period structure, and told you Shedeur went first in team drills. And still, certain voices produced confident projections of third-string status. That is not a conclusion that grew from the evidence. That is a conclusion that existed before the evidence was examined, and then went looking for whatever fragments could be arranged to make it resemble reasoning. From a distance, it looks like sports analysis. Up close, it's something else entirely. There's a schematic football question in here that gets almost no serious analytical attention, and I find that genuinely puzzling. Monken built one of the most dynamic offenses in the league in Baltimore, and the entire load-bearing structure of that offense was Lamar Jackson, one of the most unique athletic talents the quarterback position has ever produced, a player whose legs fundamentally reorganized every defensive calculation on every snap. Now look at who is competing in Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders is not that style of quarterback. He wins through the pocket, through timing precision, structural accuracy, quick coverage recognition, and clean delivery inside a well-designed system. Deshaun Watson at his best in Houston was explicitly a dual-threat player. The plays that made him special involved his legs changing the math on down after down. If what Monken is constructing in Cleveland centers pocket processing, timing efficiency, and system-based accuracy as its primary operating principles, then the honest football question that needs a real answer is whether Shedeur Sanders represents the more natural schematic fit for what this coaching staff is actually trying to build. That question deserves genuine analysis. It is not receiving it. Cribbs said one more thing that might be the most important observation anyone made in this whole conversation, and it went almost completely unnoticed. He brought up the new stadium, this genuine inflection point where, with the Watson contract beginning its slow recession toward franchise history, Cleveland has a real opportunity to walk into a new building with a new identity and a new face who represents what is being constructed rather than what already collapsed. A new building needs a new story. And the story already surrounding Shedeur Sanders has real weight. A quarterback disrespected at the draft in a way that was publicly documented, who arrived at a franchise structurally unprepared to develop him, who competed under genuinely brutal conditions and still earned Pro Bowl recognition, who spent his offseason doing invisible work and turning down easy content because he had something more important to accomplish, who showed up to voluntary minicamp, took the first team reps on day one, and watched the coverage declare the competition essentially resolved before training camp had even started. That is an arc with resonance. The kind of relationship between a quarterback and a city that doesn't just fill seats in a new building, but creates something that endures. The competition hasn't reached full OTAs. Nobody has played under real pressure with real consequences attached. Everything that has been declared and projected and repeated at sufficient volume to take on the appearance of settled fact has been generated from complete darkness. When the lights actually come on, when the huddle is real and the stadium is full and everything performative gets stripped away by the weight of actual consequence, that is when this story gets written for real. Don't let 3 April days in shorts write it for you. And everything I've watched and thought carefully about tells me the answer is going to be considerably more interesting than the version certain people have been working so hard to sell.